Welcome to the Spiritual Checkup for Friday, May the 8th. I'm so excited about the two authors to tell you about today. They're absolutely two of my top authors of all time. We're working through 10 most important authors that have shaped my spiritual life, and these have got to be right near the top. One's an Englishman and one's a German. They both actually lived at the same time. They both experienced world wars, and they experienced them from different parts of the world. So let's dig in and see who we're talking about today. The first person is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer died on April the 9th, 1945. He was actually executed by hanging for his part in a plot against Hitler. And he was executed just days before the liberation of the camp in which he was interned. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a fascinating life. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a number of good movies, there's a number of good books, there's a documentary like this one on Bonhoeffer. There was a full feature film called Bonhoeffer, Agent of Grace. And if you get a hold of that or find it somewhere, I think it's worth watching. Bonhoeffer grew up in Germany at a very tumultuous time. He had some interesting experiences as well. At one point, he went over to New York and studied at Union Theological Seminary. And during his time there, he taught Sunday school in Harlem. And while he was in Harlem, he was exposed to African American churches and the spirituals that they sang, and it shaped his life. And it was quite a profound experience for him. He was also set to meet Mahatma Gandhi because he was interested in nonviolent resistance, in pacifism, but he never got the chance to go and visit with him. In fact, he went kind of the opposite direction. In the end, Bonhoeffer worked together with some other undercover agents to try and plot the assassination of Hitler. And in the end, he was implicated in that assassination plot, and he was tried and sent to prison and eventually executed. He was only 39 years old when he died. Well, he wrote a number of books. He pastored, he taught in seminary. He was a Lutheran, but he was part of the Confessing Church. And there's a number of books that have been highly influential in my life. One of them is Life Together, this exploration of what it means to be in Christian community. And here's one of my favorite quotes. I've probably said it before when I'm preaching, but this is from Life Together. The person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community. I just think that's incredibly profound. And Life Together is a book worth reading. Another book that's been influential from Dietrich Bonhoeffer might not be as well known, but it's Spiritual Care. It's kind of his instructions to pastors, especially young pastors, on how to practice spiritual care. So not simply psychological counseling, but actually to stay in our lane as pastors and offer grace through the gospel in our care for others. That's been a huge book, even though it's small, but that's a big book for me. But his ultimate book for many people, including myself, is a book called The Cost of Discipleship. Now, I picked up this copy sometime when I was in England, and as a little bonus, there was a newspaper clipping right inside this copy of the book, and the headline is, "No Pastors in Jail." And it says, "For the first time since 1945, there are no Protestant ministers in East German jails." And this was dated 1964. And so kind of an interesting little note on history. Well, The Cost of Discipleship has a lot of profound insights, but probably the biggest one is Bonhoeffer's understanding of grace. And here's one line from the book. It says this: "Cheap grace is the deadly enemy of our church. We are fighting today for costly grace." So if you want to know what costly grace is, you're going to have to get the book and have a read at it. It's well worth reading. I think Bonhoeffer for me has that combination of courage, just raw courage, and raw honesty. I love the fact that Bonhoeffer, looking back in his life, could pinpoint his mistakes, his errors, both theologically and how he lived with others, and able to confess those and learn from them. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, so much more I could say, Costs of Discipleship, and a host of other books. And if nothing else, get a hold of the film and watch it. Okay, let's turn to the Englishman. The Englishman that I want to highlight today is C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis. And actually, he's not an Englishman, he's an Irishman. He was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and moved to England, and is best known probably for this great work, The Chronicles of Narnia. And I remember reading these when I was very young. I loved the time in the fall in the Okanagan Valley. When the leaves were turning and the snow started to fall, it seemed to be the right time to read the Chronicles of Narnia. And I would read them over and over again and just get lost in that world. And so that is part of Clive Staples Lewis. But of course, he was friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. And Lewis actually served in the trenches in World War I. He was wounded and sent home, and a couple of his friends died. And that profoundly impacted his life, as did his relationship with a lady named Joy. And he married her, and just 4 years after their marriage, she died of cancer. And that had a profound impact on his life too. We'll get to more of that in a moment. C.S. Lewis is probably best known for his apologetics, sort of his argument for the Christian faith. And I think even today, C.S. Lewis is still doing a lot of our heavy lifting when it comes to apologetics. And so we have books like Mere Christianity, which is a classic of C.S. Lewis, well worth reading, and books like The Problem of Pain, in which he addresses that whole issue. But the one book that people might not be so familiar with, that has had a profound impact on my life, is not really a book at all. It's actually his very personal reflection on the grief he experienced after losing his wife, Joy. And this little book is called A Grief Observed. And it's incredibly honest, it's incredibly raw, and it's well worth reading, especially if you're going through a time of loss or grief. Let me just read a couple of lines from chapter 1, and you'll get a sense of how personal this book is. Lewis says, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep on swallowing. At other times it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There's a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moment when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me." So some of you will resonate with those words, and I encourage you to pick up A Grief Observed and read through that. If you need a copy, I'll find a way to get mine to you. So C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, is an absolute must-read in so many different ways. He died in 1963 and has left an incredible legacy. A few years ago, I actually got the complete works of C.S. Lewis on my Kindle for 99 cents, which seemed very, very odd, but I have it all on my Kindle. Well, I think, kind of like Bonhoeffer, what attracts me to Lewis is his courage, his intellectual power, but also his raw honesty when it comes to faith and those issues. So Lewis and Bonhoeffer have been highly instrumental in my understanding of what it means to live the Christian life, and I highly recommend them to you as well. Well, thanks for checking in for this edition of the Friday Spiritual Checkup. We won't be around next week, but we'll be back the week following with another edition and a couple more authors for you to explore. Thanks so much.